All right, Matt, so one of the questions we were asked for Fight Night picks, Parry, and counters from Ricky Ponting, who asked, pre-UFC 249 video, whose resume looks stronger, Khabib or Tony, last 12 wins of both? Which is really interesting because for Tony Ferguson, he's won 12 fights in a row, so it's easy to go off of that. For Khabib, if you go all the way back, and it's close to when he debuted in the UFC, actually, it is his UFC debut because he's had 12 fights in the UFC. It was against Kamal Shalorus. So if you go up from that, you have Kamal Shalorus, Gleison Tibau, Thiago Tavares, Abel Trio, Pat Healy, Rafael dos Anjos, Daryl Horcher, Michael Johnson, who beat Tony Ferguson, Edson Barboza, Al Iaquinta, then we're talking championship fights, Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier. And if you look at it for Tony Ferguson, like I said, he had that fight against Michael Johnson that he lost, and then since then, absolute heater, wins over Mike Rio, Katsunori Kikuno. Then you have Danny Castillo, Abel Trujillo, which rhymes, Gleison Tibau, Josh Thompson, Edson Barboza, Lando Venata, Rafael dos Anjos, Kevin Lee, Anthony Pettis, Donald Cerrone. That's a long list. That's 24 fights to try and remember. Some similarities between the two of them. And if you want to talk about Tony Ferguson, who's been in the UFC for a longer amount of time, wins and losses, and like even before the Michael Johnson fight, he was fighting top competition. It's an interesting question.
It is.
It's one that I like to get into. So Matt, without giving it away, really, to me, it doesn't matter, and it's not to say anything about the question, but like some of those ones, like we're talking about Khabib's UFC debut versus Tony Ferguson, the two fights that he had after losing to
12
Michael
fights
Johnson.
ago is like 8 years, so you really have to think about it like in those terms. Like in 8 years, just the amount that both these guys has improved, it's kind of insane when you go back and watch their first fight. Unrecognizable. So I do agree with you.
I like the question though because it's interesting. For Tony Ferguson, his last loss was 13 fights ago.
And I think it brings us to kind of a bigger question. Does the winner of this make you the lightweight GOAT? Because when you really think about it, a lot of the guys that these guys have beaten kind of match up well against other guys' title defenses. So that's kind of how I'm skewing the question. Because Tony Ferguson, Edson Barboza's title challenger any other era. Josh Thompson fought for Strikeforce title multiple times. He fought RDA, Kevin Lee, Anthony Pettis, Cowboy Cerrone. Like, those are all championship quality fighters. And if Tony can go out there and finish Khabib to kind of top that win streak off, I don't know how it would make him the greatest lightweight of all time. And same thing for Khabib too, because like, you're not just beating that guy, you're beating all 12 guys that guy's beat on his way into the cage. So if Khabib can finally get that last head on his mantle, which is Tony Ferguson, because they've always been, just the rumored matchups, the fallouts that the fights have always had. So the winner of this fight, I think, if you wanted to make that argument, is the greatest lightweight of all time, I wouldn't be against it. And how we were kind of talking about before, not giving it away too much, up until their most recent outings, I feel like Tony had the better opponents. Just Tony beats everyone kind of the same way, no matter who you are or what skill set you bring to the cage. He's going to cut you up a lot, and he's going to try to make you quit between the second and third round. Because when you watch Tony Ferguson fights, not just his last two, both, of course, doctor stoppages after the second round, but Tony needs one round, and he's kind of slow. He's a bit of a slow starter, but once he kind of downloads what you're doing after that first round, you better hope that he beats you quick in that second one. Because it's just going to be constant pressure, elbows, uppercuts, takedowns. There's not a single thing he doesn't do well. He leaves his chin up a little bit, and he gets dropped and gets right back up. He's kind of like a boogeyman that way. El Cucuy. So, Tony up until his last two, but the Dustin Poirier and Conor McGregor wins, to me at least, are better than any win that Tony has. Conor, say what you want about him. He's in that big three, though, of Tony, Conor, and Khabib. So the fact that one guy's beat two of those three is quite significant.
For me, you look at Tony Ferguson's record. So you beat Donald Cerrone, who's challenged for a title. You beat the former champion Anthony Pettis. You beat Kevin Lee, who's been up there, done that. You beat RDA, a former champion. Okay, those are all really good wins. And you brought it up too. Like a win over Gleison Tibau, you might think isn't a huge deal.
It's good at the time, though.
Going back to 2015, good at the time. Josh Thompson, kind of on his way out.
That was a big win, though.
A good performance. And same thing with Edson Barboza, especially finishing him. But if you look at Khabib's record, we're looking at a win over Dustin Poirier, who just beat Max Holloway, who a lot of people had Max Holloway.
Okay, controversial thing, and I'm kind of biased. I think Dustin beats Tony Ferguson. I think Tony has a way better chance to beat Khabib than Dustin did. I think Tony has a better chance to beat him than Conor did. But if I'm really asking myself hardcore, like, who would win? I think Tony and Dustin have, like, a fight of the year, and I don't know who wins that. I think Tony beats Conor, though. But that's the thing. He hasn't fought anyone of that caliber just yet.
Yeah, for Khabib, the wins. I mean, so look at the Dustin Poirier fight. You're unifying the belts. You've got the interim champ, and you could say the same thing here. You could tell me that Tony's still the interim champ, whatever. But still, the fact of the matter is, if you have a fight between your interim champ, Dustin Poirier, who beat your featherweight champ, Max Holloway, who's moving up, and Justin Gaethje fighting Khabib, and Khabib absolutely mauled him and, put him into a spot where he was contemplating retirement. Like,
that's the thing, like, Dustin had 5 good seconds in that whole fight. Or, okay, he had 2 moments. He rocked Khabib a little bit on the feet, and he almost had him in the guillotine. That's how good Khabib is, though. Like, those are the things you have to hold on to if you're hoping someone beats him soon enough. The best fighters in the world aren't even getting rounds on him. They're getting moments in rounds.
That's it. Go back to the fight before that against Conor McGregor, where he's absolutely all on top of him. Conor had a couple of moments, just like Dustin Poirier did. But again, Conor McGregor, this is a guy, a champ at featherweight, a champ at lightweight, like, biggest star in the sport, and Khabib absolutely extinguished that fire. And then if you even go back further, Ally Quinta, okay, so he comes in on short notice. It was supposed to be Tony, it was supposed to be Max Holloway.
Could have been Paul Felder.
Then you get Ally Quinta, and in that fight, again, gets the belt, looks great in the fight. And then before that, Barboza, Michael Johnson, who, again, that was Tony's last loss.
This is my problem.
And so on and so forth. RDA as well, former champ.
That's true. This is my problem with Khabib. Everyone's grading him on such, like, this weird gradient because, like, everyone wants to focus on the negatives that Khabib has. He doesn't have that many, though. So this is my problem. And we talked bad about Joe Rogan a little bit on this podcast, but every time Joe Rogan does commentary on a Khabib fight, someone lands a jab and he's all over it. Oh, we've never seen the champ hurt like that before. So you really can't be biased when you watch Khabib fight. The only thing you can say is he's never even come close to losing a fight. You can argue about rounds if you want to, because that's what people like to go to is, oh, Conor could have won the 3rd round. We're dealing with a guy who's so good that we're talking about other world-class fighters only being able to win the majority of a 5-round period against
This is a guy that's 28-0, and you're going to nitpick certain rounds that he had.
So,
like, for Tony Ferguson, you can go back and you can look through the win streak. And I mean, it wasn't that long ago. It was 2016 when he had the fight against Lando Venata where he got dropped and this and that. But he has such a weird style that he could get dropped, and then all of a sudden, him getting dropped is a reverse Imanari roll, and he's grabbing somebody's leg.
It's weird, because those kind of moments of weaknesses for Tony Ferguson are almost kind of where you see his strengths come from, because he'll be rocked, he'll be hit with shots that put most guys away, and then that's where he kind of becomes creative all of a sudden. He's kind of like Michael Bisping, how the fight doesn't start until he gets dropped, and then once he gets dropped and gets back up, it's like, okay, now we're going to get serious. So, with regards to their win streaks, and a lot of they both have beat, there's some names that sort of overlay, or they both beat a few of the same guys. We've talked a lot today, that's all. I think that until the last 2, though, Tony had the better resume, but just those last 2 fights, being that Cowboy Cerrone, in that fight, he had been on a pretty big win streak. He was looking really good, but Tony sort of ended Donald Cerrone, and that we know. I don't think Cowboy's ever fighting for a title again. I don't think he's ever fighting in the top 5 again. And I think a lot of that has to do with that fight. And Anthony Pettis, too. Anthony Pettis, we know, is he fights the level of his competition. If you're a really good fighter, you're going to bring out the best in him.
Great fight.
And it
great fight until it was finished, the broken hand.
Yeah, like one of the all-time great fights, but Tony was still able to put him away. And Anthony Pettis and here's the best way we can sum this up. I know Khabib would beat Anthony Pettis and Cowboy Cerrone. I don't know if Tony would beat Dustin and Conor. That's the easiest way to say it when you're trying to compare resumes. So up until the last 2, I do think Tony had the better one. I like that Tony fought Kevin Lee before he fought Khabib, though. And Kevin Lee, you can make fun of him now if you want to because he's lost a few, but Kevin Lee at the time was the guy who was going to try to beat Khabib. Like, he was the American Khabib, if you will, where he was going to go out there, he was going to out-wrestle him, out-grapple him, out-strike him, and beat him everywhere. So for Tony Ferguson to kind of fight a Khabib light before he actually fights Khabib, just have an idea of, okay, this is what a really high-paced, aggressive wrestler is going to do to me. How can I prepare for the next time I face sort of the similar one? I really like that win on his resume for that purpose.
And it's going to be weird, too, because going into that fight, was Kevin Lee sick? Did he have staph infection? This and that. And Tony Ferguson looked great. Now you're going to get, hopefully, if the fight happens, and if there is a UFC 249, then it's 100% Khabib as well. 100%. And then you really get to see 2 greats and 2 probably, like, again, we're talking legacy.
All-timers.
These are 2 of the best lightweights of all time. You can lump in your Nate Diaz's, your Josh Thompsons, your former champions, your BJ Penns, Benson Henderson, Frankie Edgar. There's all sorts of fighters in that conversation. I think if Khabib wins this fight, I think he's the greatest of all time. Mm-hmm. For me, for Tony, it would have to be a couple of title defenses.
But if he finishes Khabib, you can't say he's the greatest ever. And I can't be offended that you brought that up. Like,
yeah, that's
this
fair.
Is how good, like, this is the level of fighters that we're talking about right now. Not just 2 current greats, not just 2 generational greats, 2 of the all-time greatest fighters to ever fight. So that's why this fight might be cursed, because it might never happen, but hopefully sooner rather than later we can see these 2 guys come out.
Great question, Ricky.
Really
to answer your question, I think, based on strength of schedule and the last 12 for me, it comes down to the more recent wins, and then again, I would have to, take even if it's a 75% Conor McGregor coming off a long layoff and 100% Dustin Poirier against Donald Cerrone and Anthony Pettis in 2018 and 2019 respectively. So for me, I'm going to put a little bit more stock into Khabib, still undefeated against the best competition out there, and this is really going to cement somebody's legacy. So let's see what happens.
Exactly. No, I couldn't have said it better myself.
And like we always say, with Parry and Counter, make sure you throw down your comments below, your questions that you want to see in future videos. We really appreciate everybody tuning in. And now, as we always say with Fight Night Picks, let's get into it.